Disclaimer: this content is intended for a mature audience only. Viewer discretion is advised. The room was quiet enough that I could hear the faint hum of the night pressing against the windows, as though the darkness itself wanted to be let in. I stood near the edge of the bed, my breath caught somewhere between hesitation and longing. His hand moved slowly, tracing a line down my back, not hurried, not demanding, but deliberate, as if he was mapping something fragile he did not want to break. That single motion unraveled me in ways I had not expected. This is not the story of strangers or fleeting encounters. This is about two people who have lived within each other's orbit for years, husband and wife, bound not just by vows but by the quiet gravity of shared days, arguments that ended in silence, laughter that burst in kitchens, and moments where love felt both like a gift and a responsibility. Tonight, however, something was different. His eyes carried a weight I could not decipher, equal parts tenderness and unspoken intent. There was no guilt between us, no sense of wrongness, only the complexity of being human, of surrendering to a connection that is both comfort and challenge. I had always thought of control as mine to keep. I prided myself on composure, on being the one who held things together when the world tilted sideways. But in that still moment, when his fingers lingered just a little lower, I felt something inside me loosen. It wasn't about giving up, but about choosing to trust, choosing to lean into the vulnerability that love often demands. I didn't know what would come next, and maybe that was what shook me most. The air between us was charged, but not loud. It was a quiet storm, the kind that builds and whispers before it breaks. And as he drew closer, his voice softened against my ear, carrying a question I wasn't sure I was ready to answer. Would I let him take me past the edge of my own control? The answer lingered, unspoken, suspended in the space between his touch and my breath. The silence stretched, but it wasn't empty. It pulsed, like a heartbeat shared between us. His hand lingered at the small of my back, and though the touch was light, it carried the weight of years. I felt him waiting, not for permission, but for me to decide whether I would meet him where he stood. We weren't new to each other. Marriage had already carved its marks on us, some tender, some jagged. I remembered the early days when his gaze made me feel both untouchable and entirely seen, when love was simple and nights bled into mornings without thought. But time had added layers, unspoken frustrations, responsibilities that bent our shoulders, and small distances we didn't always notice until they widened into quiet voids. Maybe that's why this moment felt so rare. It wasn't just about the physical closeness. It was about him reaching for me in a way that reminded me of who we used to be, and asking me, silently, to meet him halfway. I glanced over my shoulder, catching his eyes in the dim glow of the bedside lamp. They weren't urgent, they were steady, searching, almost reverent. His silence said what words could not: I'm here. I want you, not the polished, untouchable version you show the world, but you, raw and unguarded. My chest tightened. How long had it been since I had allowed myself to feel this undone? I had always carried control like armor, the quiet strength that held our life together. But tonight, I sensed he wanted to see the cracks, not to exploit them, but to step through and hold me there. His breath brushed against my shoulder, sending a shiver through me, and still he waited. Not demanding, not rushing, just present. And in that presence was an invitation, to let the walls fall, to let love be as uncertain and vulnerable as it once was. My hand hovered near his, not yet touching, but trembling with the choice I had to make. Part of me wanted to surrender, to see what might happen if I let go. Another part feared what it would mean to give up the control I had clung to for so long. The air thickened between us, fragile and electric. And still, the question hung, would I allow him to take me further, into a space where I was no longer the one holding everything together? The warmth of his hand stayed with me even as he drew back just enough to study my face. That pause, gentle, deliberate, felt heavier than words. I knew he was asking for more than closeness, he was asking for honesty. And that frightened me. I had been carrying secrets, small ones that piled like pebbles in my chest until they felt like stones. Memories of nights when I pretended to be too tired, when I turned away not because I didn't want him, but because the weight of the day left me brittle. There were also the shadows of arguments we never finished, those sharp silences that stretched into days, teaching us how to live side by side without always touching. His fingers brushed my shoulder again, a subtle tether pulling me back into the moment. I wanted to close my eyes and let the world dissolve, but my mind was stubborn, dragging me into the tangle of then and now. He, too, carried ghosts. I saw them in the way his jaw tightened sometimes when he thought I wasn't looking, in the way he lingered at the door after a long day at work as if bracing himself before stepping inside. There were moments when I feared I was losing him, not to someone else, but to the quiet erosion of time, to the parts of himself he no longer shared. Now, here we were, standing at a fragile edge. His closeness reminded me of all the promises we had made and broken, of the tenderness that had always been there, waiting beneath the surface. It wasn't just desire that pressed between us, it was the ache to be known again, fully and without disguise. "I don't want to lose you," I almost whispered, though the words never passed my lips. Instead, my silence filled the room, thick with all I couldn't say. He leaned closer, his forehead nearly brushing mine, and the steadiness in his eyes nearly undid me. This wasn't a man asking for control, it was a man asking me to share the weight, to trust that I didn't always have to be the strong one. My heart ached with the beauty and terror of it. I wanted to give in, to let myself be vulnerable, but fear held me. What if letting go meant unraveling everything I had built to keep us safe? The question lingered like a storm cloud on the horizon, ready to break but not yet falling. The space between us felt impossibly narrow, yet vast enough to hold everything we had not said. His breath touched my skin, steady but expectant, and my chest rose with the rhythm of a heart unsure whether to leap or retreat. Every part of me trembled with the weight of choice. Was this the moment I allowed myself to surrender, or the moment I pulled away to preserve the control I'd always clung to? His hand slipped down, not in urgency but in insistence, anchoring me in place. It wasn't force, it was faith, faith that I might stay, that I might finally trust him enough to be seen without the mask of composure I wore so carefully. My throat ached with unspoken words. He still wants me. After everything. Even the versions of me I tried to hide. But shadows pressed close. I thought of the nights when I resented him for not noticing how tired I was, when silence felt safer than confession. I thought of the unkind things I had said under my breath, the doubts I buried deep, afraid he'd see them as rejection. Did he know how much of me I had kept locked away? Could he bear it if I let it spill out now? "Why do you hesitate?" His voice finally broke the silence, low and steady, as though he already knew the answer but wanted me to give it shape. The question pierced me. Because the truth was terrifying, I hesitated not out of lack of love, but because love itself felt dangerous. To let him in meant risking the collapse of the careful balance I had built. To let him touch not just my body but the hidden corners of my soul was to risk being undone in a way I couldn't control. His eyes never left mine, and in that gaze I saw no judgment, only patience edged with longing. That, more than anything, threatened to undo me, the possibility that he could hold all of me, even the parts one had deemed unlovable. My hand finally touched his, tentative at first, then firmer, as though testing the waters of my own courage. The air between us thickened, every breath charged, every heartbeat loud. I stood on the precipice of something vast, both terrifying and beautiful, and I knew that one step forward would change everything. Still, I hesitated. His hand remained beneath mine, steady, warm, grounding. Yet even in that closeness, I felt a tremor run through me, not from his touch, but from the storm gathering inside my chest. For years, I had built walls, carefully stacked stone upon stone, protecting not only myself but also him from truths I was too afraid to voice. Tonight, his patience, his quiet insistence, pressed against those walls, daring them to fall. And then, like a breath carried on the wind, the twist arrived, not from him, but from me. "I don't always know how to love you," I whispered, the words escaping before I had the chance to catch them. They startled me as much as they startled him, hanging in the dim air like a confession too raw to take back. His eyes flickered, a brief flash of pain, quickly buried beneath the steadiness he always carried. "You think I don't feel the same?" he asked softly, and the honesty in his voice unsettled me. "I've been afraid too. Afraid of pushing too hard, of asking for more when I didn't know if you wanted to give it." The room shifted then, the silence no longer tender but edged with something sharper, vulnerability layered over vulnerability, two truths colliding. For the first time, I realized he hadn't only been waiting for me, he had been protecting himself too. His restraint, his patience, it wasn't just kindness. It was fear. The tension between us deepened, not dissolving but thickening, as if the air itself demanded we step closer or risk breaking apart entirely. I thought of the years we had shared, the times when we reached for each other easily, when laughter was enough to bind us, and the darker seasons when we lived like strangers under the same roof. What if this moment wasn't just about trust, but about survival, about whether we could still choose each other, fully, despite everything unspoken? He leaned his forehead to mine then, and I felt the weight of his unvoiced plea. It wasn't desire that pressed hardest now, but desperation, his need to know I wouldn't keep retreating behind walls neither of us could climb forever. And in the stillness, I understood, this wasn't only about letting go of control. It was about deciding if I could be brave enough to love him as imperfectly as I loved myself. The words lingered in the air, raw and trembling. "I don't always know how to love you." For a moment, silence pressed in on us, heavy as stone. Then his hand shifted, lifting gently to cradle my face, his thumb brushing the edge of a tear I hadn't realized had fallen. "You don't have to know," he murmured, voice low but unshaking. "You just have to stay with me. That's all I've ever wanted." The confession broke something open inside me, not weakness, but a release. For years I had mistaken strength for silence, control for love. I thought holding everything together meant never showing the cracks. Yet here he was, asking not for perfection but for presence, for the courage to let him see me whole, even in my uncertainty. And in that moment, I gave him what I had withheld for too long. I let the walls fall. My hand pressed against his chest, feeling the steady beat beneath my palm, and I allowed the trembling in my body to be seen, not hidden. "I'm afraid," I admitted. "Afraid of failing you, of not being enough. But I don't want to keep standing at a distance anymore." His eyes softened, a quiet ache flashing through them, but then his mouth curved into something that felt like both relief and promise. "You were never failing me. You just forgot that you don't have to carry this alone." The closeness between us shifted then, not just physical, but soul deep, the kind that felt like rediscovering something we thought was lost. His arms drew me in, and I leaned fully, no longer holding myself apart. The air filled with the quiet storm of release, not dramatic, but profound in its simplicity, two people choosing to begin again. And then came the twist, subtle but sharp. In his embrace, I realized the truth I had never admitted, even to myself. It wasn't control I had been afraid to lose, it was him. The thought of losing him, of watching our love quietly dissolve under the weight of silence, had terrified me more than any vulnerability ever could. Now, as I sank into his steadiness, I knew the choice was mine to make every day, not to be unbreakable, but to be present, fragile, and still his. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid. The night settled into a gentler rhythm after the storm of our confessions. Wrapped in his arms, I felt the quiet truth of what we had just crossed together, not an ending, but a beginning disguised as a breaking point. The air no longer felt heavy, it was lighter now, carrying the scent of possibility, of a love that had been tested and had chosen to endure. We didn't speak for a while. Words had already done their part, and silence now felt like healing. His hand rested against my back, no longer asking, no longer pressing, simply being there, a steady reminder that I wasn't alone in the carrying anymore. When I finally drew back to meet his eyes, I saw not the man I had feared losing, but the one who had been waiting all along. Waiting for me to trust, to let go, to stand beside him not as someone perfect, but as someone real. I thought control was the only way to hold us together, I admitted softly. But maybe what holds us is the choice we keep making, to come back, even when it's hard. He smiled, tired but luminous, the kind of smile that felt like dawn after a long night. That's all I ever wanted, for us to keep choosing each other. In that simple exchange, the subplots of our silences, our doubts, our separate fears, seemed to find their resolution. The ghosts were still there, but they no longer had power over us. They had shaped us, yes, but they had also led us here, into a truth more intimate than any flawless love could have been. Later, as the house grew still around us, I realized something profound. Love isn't about never hesitating, never faltering. It's about what happens after, the courage to admit the hesitation, the choice to stay despite the falter. And so, with his hands still laced through mine, I let the last of my fear go. The night did not end in fireworks, but in something quieter, stronger, infinitely more beautiful. Because in the end, it wasn't control I needed. It was us. And we were still here.